Good afternoon and welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. This is the last meeting of the municipal year, and I'd also like to take this opportunity to first of all note the end of an era for two attendees here today. The first is Commissioner Jane Kennedy, and this will be her last meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. And the second is myself. Both of us will be stepping down at the elections in May, and therefore this is the last time you'll be seeing us in this venue. There's a quite nice synergy to that, as my first political role on returning from university some years ago was actually working on Jane's selection campaign for PCEC. And so it's quite nice that the brief end to my political career will be alongside Jane, who I've long considered a friend. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention some issues that have been going on with the Police and Crime Panel in the background. Two members of the public who have raised administrative and long-standing concerns both with Merseyside Police, with the Police and Crime Panel and with the Police and Crime Commissioner, have requested the right to speak today in relation to their concerns. Both of these individuals have been advised by relevant officers, including lawyers, that the panel does not have the power or authority to resolve their issues at this stage, and therefore I will not be acquiescing to their request to speak today. I'm sure this will come as a disappointment, but I am mindful that the panel has very strict objectives as according to statute, and I've been advised by lawyers, by officers, and indeed by my own reading of those regulations and laws that we simply do not have the authority to do what is being asked. As we do not have the authority to do what is being asked, I will not be taking up the public's time with that matter. I'd like to begin today then with apologies. Mr. Moran.
Thanks, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Gladden and Parsons.
I believe Councillor Hattersley also
and Councillor Hattersley. Yeah.
Fantastic. I won't do introductions. We've done a number of these meetings over the last year, including this is our second today. This morning we interviewed the Commissioner's nominee for Chief Constable, and the results of our confirmation hearing will be published very shortly. I'd now like to move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members of the panel have any declarations of interest? As always, colleagues, I would remind you that if it suddenly becomes apparent that there is a conflict that you should have declared, please declare it as soon as possible, and we'll sort that as soon as we can. Commissioner, for the last time, item 3, supporting and challenging the Commissioner. 3A, that is pages 11 to 38 in your booklet. Thank you. Jane, sorry, you're on mute.
Get a t-shirt. I'm going to get a t-shirt made. You know, you're on mute. Apologies for that, Chair. First of all, thank you to you. A personal thanks. I know I wouldn't be here as Police and Crime Commissioner without the support of people like your good self who helped me in my election campaigns. And I know that I work with many colleagues on this call and across Merseyside. Really appreciate the support you've given me over the years, and I wish you every success in everything that you do in the future. I think it's often little understood just how much work elected councillors are required to put in to do the job well. And I know that you are one of those who has invested a huge amount of personal time and effort to serve the people of St Helens. So well done and good luck for the future. I enjoyed the panel meeting this morning. I just wanted to say I've never seen the panel so mellow. I hope that continues into the afternoon with our discussions today. This first report is a demonstration to you of my work delivering the oversight of the priority of working with partners to improve road safety. It's one of the priorities in the police and crime plan, and it's a priority therefore for Merseyside Police. I'll just give a very short, in fact just one sentence, to say that the number of people killed or seriously injured in Merseyside has decreased year by year since I made this a priority for the police. And we've reached the target of fewer than 400 KSIs, we call them, this year. But even one person killed or seriously injured on the roads is one too many. There's been a couple of worrying areas of increase, although the overall trend everywhere is down. There's been an increase, I thought I'd just draw one out, in people, as people took up cycling during the lockdown, particularly in the spring and summer of last year. There was sadly an increase in the number of people killed and seriously injured when as cyclists. And I did ask the force to concentrate on this key thematic group when restrictions permit, as they restart their bike safe and safe path, beg your pardon, put my teeth in, safe pass programs. There's been a recent HMIC report on road safety, and they indicate that KSIs nationally are on the increase. So it's important that I take this opportunity to thank the Merseyside Road Safety Partnership, led by Superintendent Nairi Wayne, and the work that they've done, working together. Their efforts have achieved a significant reduction in the KSIs here in Merseyside. I'm going to stop at that point and leave the report to you, Chair, and your panel members to see if they have questions that they wish. I'm sure they will, around the content of the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Panel members, I'm aware Councillor Jennings has an interest in this matter. Do I have any other questions, comments or queries? Mr. Tadeo? Brilliant. If we can go with Sarah first, if the Commissioner or her staff can respond, and then I'll move to Brian after that, if that's okay. Sarah?
For the report. I waited for this with anticipation to see whether we'd reach the target, and it's great to see that we have. Even though I do think 2020 was a slightly difficult year to use as an accurate model, given that there were, in theory, far fewer vehicles on the road, and yet still we managed to kill or seriously injure even more cyclists. So there was. I'm just wondering if the trend had been followed, whether we would have actually met that target. So that's sort of one question, whether you had any kind of knowledge about that. And then I see that you've backed the Wirral Council's Safe Roads campaign and a motion that recently went to Council. Plus, I know that Liverpool City Council adopted a Vision Zero policy, looking to the future. But I was wondering, it's a bit vague as to when you anticipate that happening, and it would be good if the incoming Police and Crime Commissioner could actually set a target date for that, because ultimately, you said in your opening statement, even one ASI on the road in any given year is too many. So I would like to see a slightly more definite goal for that. If I could start with those two, I've got a couple more after that, but maybe just some reflections on the numbers to start with.
Thank you, Councillor. If I may, Chair, the target would have been reached. That was my expectation within the time frame that I had set. You're quite right to say that the circumstances of last year and the dramatic decline in the numbers of vehicles on the road did help and therefore there is a degree of, you can't really be entirely confident that the drop in numbers is down to the enforcement of the or the work that the partnership have done around the priority that I set Merseyside Police. But nonetheless, we've hit the target. I think going forward, a new PCC, one of the first things that they will do is review the police and crime plan, and they will want to reflect their personal priorities in such a plan. However, I always tried to reflect public concerns in the priorities that I set for Merseyside Police. The first plan was very much based upon the long-standing set of priorities that the police authority had developed for Merseyside Police. It was a well-worked set of priorities. The police knew what they needed to do to work towards those priorities. So I added only hate crime and the combating of hate crime as a priority that I brought to the table. But a new PCC will want to review the plans that we've used over the last 8 years. And I'm hopeful that any new PCC will consider that road safety is a very key and important public priority. It's certainly one of those issues that is raised most often in correspondence to my office. And we have a lot of people and a lot of groups, cyclist groups, pedestrian groups, and others who are concerned about road safety and the safety of all road users. So I'm hopeful a new PCC will hold to it, and it will be part of the role of this panel to examine new plans and new priorities when they are brought forward. But that is a matter for the future. Now, I think I've touched on 2 of your questions there. I'm not sure if I covered all of the points you raised.
I think it was an accurate reflection of, I guess, what I was trying to hear. I suppose the next set of questions I have are around enforcement and emphasising speed monitoring, for example, and how we are holding people to account for their actions. We're looking at a lot of kind of statistics and data, and we've got this many numbers of this, but these are real people that we're talking about. And I think what a member of the public who might have been affected by an RTI might expect to see is more numbers around punishments and fines and how speeding will be enforced in the future, for example. How will that be prioritised? And I appreciate that in the MIC report, we're talking about reduced numbers and reduced capacity within the police force, but I still think that that's something people do expect to see on the roads is why are these people speeding up and down my road not punished for that? So it's how to kind of put some resources in that direction as well. I think that was it pretty much. Thank you.
As you know, my role would be to monitor how Merseyside Police and working with Merseyside Road Safety Partnership, how they carried out the priority. And they have detailed in an annex, I think it's page 30 in your papers, and page 31, there is a table, camera enforcement overview and linear trend over the last 12 months, which gives you some figures and also shows you where the trends are predicted to go. The priority was a big incentive for Merseyside Police to bring more officers and staff into the Safer Roads unit. And they worked with the Road Safety Partnership to bring a greater focus on the overall enforcement of the rules governing traffic and car drivers, cyclists, motorcyclists, everybody who uses the road. And that there's absolutely no question in my mind that greater focus and investment in the unit has been probably the single biggest factor in reducing the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads. My concern has always been that enforcement is really important and needs to be done. And you're right, the public expect, and certainly they look to see it happen wherever possible, that people who are flouting the rules and driving dangerously and causing a risk to other road users should be dealt with. However, there are two other really important factors that influence the numbers of people who are at risk on the roads, and that is the engineering of the roads and cycle paths and the other routes that people use to travel, and also education. So it's education of drivers, education of cyclists, pedestrians and others. And the Road Safety Partnership really make sure that the focus covers all three. It's something I insisted upon at the outset because it didn't feel to me appropriate that all of the job of reducing the number of people killed and seriously injured on the road should fall to the police force alone. And I'm really pleased to say that the other members across the partnership took up that challenge and have been working very hard in collaboration with the police, but also with the fire service and the Department of Transport, who do quite a lot of the engineering work. So it's been encouraging to see that partnership develop. And as the greater investment from the police has taken effect, to see the numbers of people whose lives sometimes are changed dramatically, and in sadly, some cases where they lose their lives, it's an absolutely appalling thing when it happens. And it's great to see that our roads are safer as a result of this investment. And I'm with you in that I would want to see that continue. And the introduction of policies that commit to zero incidents of this kind, that's something we should really hold dear and really campaign on. I think the public would be delighted to see it. We'll only get it if there are, I suspect, major cultural differences in the way that our road systems are managed, and the provision of really good cycling routes that take cyclists and other pedestrians separately away from other traffic. But I suspect we are some way away from the kind of amazingly peaceful streets that you see in some cities across Europe, such as The Hague, which I've seen, where it's dramatically different to what we experience in our towns and cities. One last thought, just to say to you, there is something that Simon O'Brien is arguing for, which is that, I don't know if you've seen them in continental streets, a simple black and white zebra crossing being painted across the entrance to all side streets in a built-up area. You don't have pelican crossings or Belisha beacons or anything else, just the paint on the road. According to experience in the continent of Europe, really does have an impact on the way in which drivers turn into side streets or come out of them, and the respect given to people crossing the roads improves. Apparently there are reasons lost in the legality of how we manage our road systems that mean we can't do it here, but I've been supporting Simon O'Brien in arguing the case for that.
I was going to highlight that actually in one of my comments. I think that's a fantastic idea. I've seen them in action and they work very well. I think for the British public to have the confidence to step out onto a zebra and trust the driver to stop for them is something that will take a bit of getting used to. But I think if we could get those implemented, that will be awesome. And then my final comment will be that the good things that are happening. Operation Safe Pass, for example, is really effective. And a colleague of mine recently had to do a speed awareness training course. And rather than come out kind of grey and green in the gills and nauseated by what he had seen, he came out bouncing with enthusiasm for his newfound knowledge of speed and limitations. It was brilliantly presented. So I think whoever's organising those courses, they're doing them very well. And I hope that they similarly are having a positive knock-on effect for people's driving behaviour. There ends my questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not going to invite you to name names.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Thank you, Commissioner. Do I have any other further queries, comments or questions on item 3A?
Yeah.
Councillor Rowlands?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just the last time the Commissioner was with us is to thank the Commissioner for taking this priority. As Mayor in 2015-16, I regularly attended the Anglican Cathedral to the masses for road victims, and it was heartbreaking to see some of the stories and the effect that it had on families and the community. So it is a big thing. And in that year, sadly, I have to handle the PC Phillips tragedy, which is, again, another indication of what can happen. So I'm really, really pleased that you took this on, Commissioner, this year as a priority. And I hope, as you say, that the next Commissioner coming in takes this on as a priority too. Thank you very much for all your work you've done on it.
Thank you, Councillor. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. Mr. Tadeo?
Yeah, thanks. It's to do with the data, the statistics. Obviously, the KPIs are down because of the reduced volume of traffic. Have you prorated the data to see if it's a genuine reduction in road traffic incidents?
The data is collated and verified by the Department of Transport. It does mean that we work with a bit of a time lag, but Merseyside Police are content that the data is accurate. Don't know, Clive, if there's anything. Just shake your head if there's nothing else. But I think that's certainly I've always understood that the data. Before we work with it too closely, the Department of Transport verifies it, which does put us behind several months before we can actually discuss whether the data is reliable.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question really is around about the brake service contract. I think it's pretty important that carries on. Is that one of the that's something that the new Police and Tram Commission can take on?
Can you just point me to the page in the document? And I
can page 19.
Beg your pardon. Yes, Brake is a national charity. The difficulty I have is that the funding that I receive for supporting victims is defined by the Ministry of Justice as being only to be used for the victims of crime. I think I explained that, and consequently, often the victims of a road traffic incident, the families are not able to be supported by the funds that are supplied to me by the MOJ. Locally, we support Road Peace, the Merseyside Road Safety Partnership supports Road Peace, and rather than Brake, who perform a similar service to Brake locally. And I work through them to try to deliver the support. We do talk about the Brake contract, but it's not something that we don't really use the services of Brake here in Merseyside.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tadeo. Any further comments, queries or questions? Can I ask that we accept that report then? All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Fantastic. Item 3B, Police and Crime Commissioners Complaints Monitoring Process.
You'll recall that there were some major changes introduced to the complaint system and the role of PCCs in police complaints. The report in your papers outlines the approach that I use when dealing with complaints about the Chief Constable, complaints about my staff or my office, and it details the way in which I monitor the Force's Professional Standards Unit. I know that there may be questions about this, as I think possibly one of the first times I've presented a report to you on this. I will invite Clive to assist me with this. Clive Howard, for members of the public watching, is my Chief Executive Officer and works most closely on this area. The change that I made following the change in the rules regarding the PCC's role was to members of staff who triaged and managed the complaints going into the Professional Standards Department of Merseyside Police. That, I think that is in line with most PCCs across England and Wales when these changes were made. One or two brought the whole of the Professional Standards Unit into the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I didn't feel that was the right thing to do. I didn't think it was in the interest of complainants to do that, and nor was it in the interests of best learning coming out of police complaints. So that being the case, I now do deal with complaints at a different stage. The report has some figures in it, which you might have seen. I have to say, I think over the last year, we've seen a reduction in complaints, but I think that's probably largely due to the impact of the COVID restrictions and lockdown. I'm not sure, Clive, if you want to add anything at this point, or whether you will choose to come in when I get some questions in a moment. Yep. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do I have any comments, queries or questions on this agenda item? Mr. Pickup?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if the dipsticking type approach, which we had reported to us previously, that the Chief Executive undertakes, is still, in the Commissioner's Office view, the right approach, or whether that is under review.
I'm going to invite Clive to talk to this, if he will. He is actually involved in the working with the force around the management of complaints, and I think you might be reassured if you hear just how that is managed. Is that okay, Clive? For some reason we can't hear him.
Clive, sorry, you aren't muted, but we can't hear you. Richard, can we see if there's anything further we can do with Clive there?
I will do, Chair.
In the meantime, I think, well, maybe it's probably best if I let you fix the technology. Say something, Clive.
We got sound.
There we go. Got you.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Commissioner, Chair, and Mr. Pickup. In direct answer to the question, I think the depth sampling process has almost run its course, and the reason I say that is it was introduced probably near the very start of the Commissioner's first term, when some of our processes around police complaints were quite embryonic. What we have in place now is a far closer relationship with the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and I meet quarterly with our oversight manager for our Northwest region, and she steers me in the direction of any emerging issues in terms of complaint recording difficulties with Merseyside Police, whether that be decision making or timeliness of response, keeping the complainants informed. So there's a significant amount of information that comes into our office in that regard. I also meet with the Chief Superintendent, who oversees Merseyside Police Professional Standards Departments, and I have a bi-monthly keep in touch meeting with the Deputy Chief Constable. I think panel members will be aware that the whole issue of police conduct within a police force sits in the portfolio of the Deputy Chief Constable. I also use, and I think I mentioned this at the last panel meeting when we spoke about this item, a suite of data that the IOPC produce. Now, interestingly, and a little bit disappointingly, I have to say, the data on their website is historic now, and we haven't had anything for 2020. I've been on to them a few times about this, and the reason for it is the changes to the regulations. IOPC have made some changes to their IT systems, and some forces have also changed their IT systems that they use for harvesting data around police complaints. We haven't changed our system, so we're not at fault in that regard. However, in view of the safety nets that we currently have in place, whilst it will be really good to have the data, which I'm promised will come through first week in April, I'm satisfied that we do have sufficient contact with those who are managing complaints and the ability to scrutinise those complaints to satisfy the Commissioner that we are alive to any issues that may emerge.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Clive.
Thank you. I actually have a few queries in relation to this one. And this is me putting my lawyerly hat on. First and foremost, I know that I believe it's 7 of the recent complaints have been knocked off as an abusive process. And I was just wondering if either Commissioner or Mr. Howarth could clarify to the panel, and indeed anyone watching at home, what that would entail.
I'm going to let you do this on, Clive, because otherwise I'll say something I shouldn't.
Well, thanks, Commissioner. I would have to say that in hindsight, we could have probably used better phraseology to describe those complaints. And that phrase that's used in terms of abusive process is a hangover from the previous police regulations around police complaints. Those complaints are really historic, and often it's the same individual repeating historic complaints. But just to reassure the panel in that regard, we are currently engaged with legal advice in terms of the recording or not recording of those particular complaints.
Okay, bro. And I suppose my second question is, obviously judicial review remains for the moment anyway, remains the final recourse for complainants once the OPCC has reviewed. Is there any recording of anyone bringing a judicial review against an OPCC decision thus far?
I'm not sure there's been any recently, Clive, but I think I do recall in my first term that may have happened. I don't know if can you recall any recently, Clive?
We are in the early stages of a potential judicial review process.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's fine. That's all from me. Thank you both. Colleagues, anything further? Then are we happy to note item 3B? Anyone against that? No, fantastic. If we can now move on to 3C, Police and Crime Commissioner decisions.
I have nothing, Chair. I don't have any thing to say to this. The report is self-explanatory. You have all the details of the decisions. There have been 6 that are for us to consider today. I hand it over to you to see if there are questions arising out of that.
Well, thank you. I don't have anything for anyone, for people interested at home. This is pages 61 to 64 in the bundle. I don't have anything to ask. Does any other members have anything to ask? Very well. Are we content to note agenda item 3C? Brilliant. Thank you very much. That concludes item 3. If we now move on to item 4, forgive my misspeaking earlier, this is now pages 61 to 64 in your bundle, corporate governance framework review. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the panel will know that the Chief Constable and I have a joint corporate governance framework. This is a strategic document that sets out the way in which we govern both jointly and separately to ensure that we do business properly, lawfully, in the right way, for the right reason, at the right time. it's these are the dry and dusty parts of public governance and oversight, which are critically important for the public confidence in the management of public funds. Now, as part of the framework, we established a corporate governance group to review the corporate governance framework on an annual basis and to oversee that framework's implementation. The group have completed their review this year in time for our meeting today. And in addition to changes that have been made just as part of good housekeeping, the group are recommending the removal of a number of the existing delegations from the Chief Constable to the Director of Resources in the Force, which are detailed within section 4.1 of the report. Both the Chief Constable and I support the proposed changes and the adoption of the revised framework for next year. However, before we formally approve the revised framework, I do ask the panel to consider whether you are satisfied with the corporate governance framework and the arrangements in place to provide assurance to the public regarding the effective operation and compliance to the corporate governance framework.
Agreed. Thank you. Colleagues, anything to raise at this point? No? Very well. I believe, Mr. Moran, correct me if I'm wrong, but we thus need to hold a vote on whether to accept.
You can move forward just with the consent generally of the panel chair, if that's what you want to do. You don't need to hold a formal vote on it.
No, that's fine. Well, unless we have any objections, I'm happy that we adopt and we move forward. Item 5, the Police and Crime Commissioner's draft annual report.
Chair, that's great to get over that one. I've got to say, I've got John Riley on the call. He hasn't had a single question yet, so I'm going to make sure we pull him in at some point during this afternoon's proceedings. You have in your packs the first draft of the annual report for this year, and I've called it A Year Like No Other. I think it suitably sums up the last 12 months. Last year, I presented to you what I said to you was then my final annual report, and it was a sort of a backward look over the previous 2 terms in office as the PCC. But my intention for this document is not to repeat everything that was encapsulated in that final annual report. The contents and sentiments of that report still hold true. So this report is to complement that. It reports on only 10 months of the last year because that brings us up to date. And I hope that both reports will be taken together as a combined publication reflecting on my time as Police Commissioner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, Mr. Tadeo first.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't see last year's report, but this one I thought was excellent, very thorough, and lots of information that was really to a new member of the committee quite useful. I just wondered if there was anything, I didn't see any sort of negativity in the report, or anything that you thought that you could have done better, or anything that potentially you would include now if you had the opportunity to do it again.
I'd have to say I don't feel that there is. Last year we considered the draft report before it was published, and this was discussed. And I do try to. Well, I always reflect upon the views of the panel, and we have had sections in the previous report that did cover failings or areas in which we perhaps had tried to do things and they hadn't worked. So I don't feel that this report needed that. This year has been such a strange year that it's difficult to identify anything that I would want to put in that category in this report. So the short answer is no, but it's not that we haven't thought about it.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to actually come in, if that's okay, Commissioner, in relation to this. Very kindly on page 24, you offer your thanks to members of this panel. And then on page 37, which is also page 106 of the bundle, you obviously offer your thanks both to police staff, and obviously of your own staff. The one amendment I would ask, supporting this panel is a highly regarded team of officers who go, quite frankly, above and beyond, and I would ask that the report is amended to reflect that, especially after this year. I joked earlier in a private meeting that it feels like we've been going through a tick sheet of seeing what extra meetings could we possibly add on, including Deputy Commissioner, new independent members, additional meetings, and of course this morning's Chief Constable meeting. None of this would be able to be done without Mr. Moran, Mr. Torpey, and Mr. Harrison, who also have been taking calls from me at all hours of the day. And there was one point in spring last year where I believe I spoke to David far more than I actually spoke to my own wife, and I'm locked down with my own wife. The job has been phenomenal, and I would just ask that the report is amended to represent that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And absolutely, it's remiss that I hadn't already put that in. I do. Also, let me just say a personal thanks to them. I know your officers and their relationship with my team in the office is often robust. But there's a really good understanding of each other's roles and a highly professional team of people who work to deliver this oversight of the role of the PCC. Really, I will make sure that the report reflects my thanks to the team of staff at Knowsley Borough Council.
Bro, thank you, Commissioner. I would also ask if there are any further changes, whether this could be circulated to the panel via email so we can just review, because obviously it is a draft report, but as mentioned earlier, this is your final panel meeting. And then also, if there are any other changes you'd like to review before your successor joins, then if they could be sent round and we'll agree via email, or we can subsume the authority to me as we do when we need to get stuff done quickly in any event.
Thank you, Chair, and I will undertake to do that as quickly as we can, because it's important that the report is published before the end of my term.
Of course. Thank you. Colleagues, anything further to add here?
Yes, Chair.
Thanks, Keith.
Can I compliment Commissioner on this report? I've made comment about previous reports and wordage and layout, etc. No disrespect, but I'm encouraged by the fact that the first 4 pages do not contain a photograph of the Commissioner this time. However, I do appreciate this report, the layout, the content, and all of the information it contains, and I actually feel it's very readable by members of the public if they have, if and when they have access to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pickup. Anything further, colleagues?
Can I just thank Mr. Pickup for drawing my attention to that omission from the first 4 pages of the report?
I think one day someone on this panel will get away with something that Keith hasn't spotted. However, that day has not yet arrived. But there we go. Very well. If we are content to note on the basis that those corrections or amendments will be referred back to us via email, we'll discuss with colleagues via email then what we want to do, whether or not we want to record a vote via email or whether I'll sign off on it on our behalf, but we'll sort that when we come to it. Item 6, pages 109 to 118 in your bundle, the estate strategy update.
Very quickly, Chair. This is an update on progress made against the estate strategy during this year. From the report, you can see that a number of the major projects are underway. Certainly, the Rose Hill project, which is the police headquarters. I don't know if we've talked to you earlier about the fact that it's proposed to call it Rose Hill. That is progressing very rapidly indeed. In fact, staff are hoping to start moving in over the next 2 or 3 months, actually probably ahead of expectation, really. St Anne Street Police Station's refurbishment is due to begin very quickly. And just to report to you, I'm very happy that we've refurbished Halewood, Formby and Belvale in accordance with the estate strategy. There's lots of detail in this. It's a short report. It isn't a full review. And we did discuss last time whether I should supply you with a full review of the estate strategy. In thinking about it, and now with the proximity of the election, it seems to me more appropriate that that be undertaken by a police and crime commissioner coming in after an election with a new mandate. And I hope to leave a legacy of an estate strategy that has transformed the working environment for Merseyside Police, but done it in a very cost-effective way that has used the resources that we receive from the public in a responsible way, and we have continued to deliver buildings that work for the public, but also for the police service that needs increasingly modern facilities that can adapt to the pressure of the new equipment that they need, and so on. So I'll leave it, that's my comment on it to date. There may well be questions from the panel around the detail of the report.
Thank you. I can see Councillor Shaw.
Yes. Bear in mind, Commissioner, you were expressing regret a few moments ago that John Riley hadn't yet had the opportunity to speak. This might be the opportunity you're seeking. I want to refer to section 5, paragraphs 5.1, really 5.1 and 5.3. And what it says in 5.1 talks about cost of approaching £150 million. 5.3 talks about revenue savings of a touch over £500,000. Could I have it clarified? Obviously, it's like, I don't know, spending money on your house. You spend £50,000 on your house, upgrading the insulation, whatever. If it saves you £500 a year, well, you really ought to try and take into account whether it's financially good value or not. I don't know, the capital financing cost, should we call it? So can I have it clarified? When it talks about savings in 5.3 of touch over £500,000, does that take account of the capital cost of the £150 million expenditure?
John, do you want to come in?
Basically, we have the cost, and then we take away we finance that initially by capital receipts, anything that we generate. And then obviously any savings as well. The savings generally tend to be more captured in the revenue budget and the medium-term financial strategy. So they aren't offset against the capital costs as such. So the capital costs remaining, then we either, if we can fund them from grants, we will do, but not, they generally fund from borrowing. And those borrowing costs generally are over the lifetime of those assets, which could be 50 years in terms of the major buildings. And all those costs are factored into the medium-term financial strategy as we go forward. And they only come into play once the building's operational. So in terms of headquarters, we're borrowing money there to finance that and build it. And we are paying those costs initially. But once the building's set up, we do have to start budgeting for that. And those costs are built into the MTFS. And you can see from paragraph 5.1 at the moment, the estimated cost of capital financing around about £3.4 million over the MTFS period. In fact, over the next 5 or 6 years, they are due to increase as we go along to roughly about 3% of our overall direct resource funding, which we believe is affordable. And all those are being factored into the MTFS and the budget report.
I'm not sure I really follow that, as it were. I mean, in local government generally, there's, business generally, I imagine, but invest to save. The fact if you spend, a good example in local government, which most of us are, as councillors, you can spend quite a lot of money on on street lighting because you can convert them to very low running costs, whatever. It costs quite a lot to do, but because the running costs are far lower, over say 10 years, you actually save money. I'm still not clear, if you like, although obviously there are benefits in terms of much improved working environment for officers and staff. In straight financial terms, even allowing for the very significant costs, has this more than covered itself? Is that what 5.3 means? Or
no, 5.3 is basically every time we do a project, we identify what the existing running costs are within that building, and obviously then compare it with what we estimate will be the revised running costs, and often there is a saving there, and that helps inform the decision on whether to refurbish or not. It's just one of those key things we consider. And then once the building's been complete, we then crystallize those savings, and those savings there then are captured in the budget of that particular year, and then it's put into the base going forward. Those additional capital financing costs, as we borrow more, they increase, and they're also reflected in the budget report. They're not I say offset against each other, but they are clearly identified within the budget report and the medium-term financial strategy as separate lines.
Yeah,
and that's where we account for them.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that.
Can I offer further thought, Councillor Shaw, and that is that part of the strategy, the objective was to reduce the costs of leasing buildings that are a drain on the running resources of the force year on year. We haven't been able to realise that fully because of the time it's taken us to develop and go ahead with big projects like the headquarters project. However, when the staff move in there, we will be able to start releasing some very significant leases that are a big cost to the force, and those will be felt immediately within the force's overall resources. Now, they're not capital costs, they're the cost of leasing a building, but they will have an impact on the savings that the force should see as a result of this work.
That's great. Thanks for that, both of you.
So those savings that the Commission's just referred to there are captured in the MTFS and are referred to in paragraph 5.3 as part of the £2.074 million. So we are expecting some further savings as we dispose of a number of buildings and the new buildings come online.
Well, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, in terms of the buildings being able to dispose of, or rather not dispose of, what's the difference there? What had you anticipated in receipts, in capital receipts this year? And do you foresee any problem offloading those in the next near future?
It's always difficult when you're. It's always difficult when you're putting together an estate strategy to set a series of capital receipts that you hope to gain from releasing buildings. And over the period of the 6 years that we've been implementing the strategy, some of those have gone smoothly, and on other occasions they haven't. And we still hold the ownership of some buildings that we have been trying to sell, and for all sorts of reasons, including problems within the economy, and of those people seeking to purchase police stations not being able to put together the financing of it. We've had to return to the market with some buildings on occasions several times. So that has slowed that down, and that impacts upon the ability of a strategy to see the realization of those capital receipts in the timely manner that you hope when you set out down this route. But we are continuing to work hard to make sure that we don't keep property that the force has no further need of. Bear in mind that I've always said that we won't close a police station that is currently open to the public, and we won't leave an area that has had a police station without a community police station provided in its place. So those have been the guiding principles of it. But capital receipts are a difficult thing, and the value of buildings does change over time, as I know that you will appreciate. And the original estimates, I think, were in the original estate strategy. Would they be reflected in the medium-term financial strategy at this stage, John? Do we review the potential assets?
Capital receipts are reflected in the capital programme. So that's a 5-year programme. You'll see. So we're planning there when we expect to dispose of various properties, and that's then used to offset the expenditure, and then we're left with the borrowing requirements. In terms of 2021, we were anticipating the capital receipts of around about £11 million. That's for not just building, that's also vehicles as well. We forecasted now about £250,000. Now, as a result of that, we're having to borrow more. Now, that's been a number of reasons. Obviously, the COVID-19 has affected the sale of a number of properties, but also Operation Uplift has meant that we've had to retain, certainly Smith Down Lane being the big one, retain that while we refurbish St Anne Street because of Operation Uplift. So, I mean, there are consequences of us retaining buildings, but we have to borrow. But we do expect that we will then, over the next couple of years, sell those and dispose those, and we'll bring the income back in then.
And to add to what John's just said, just to add to that, Chair, if I may, and that is to say that although we only count a capital receipt when we actually get it, for obvious reasons, it doesn't mean that we don't constantly. I meet with the estates team on a fortnightly basis. We don't regularly review the progress of all of these different projects, including the intended sale of some properties. And for me, it's always been really important that the estate strategy be flexible enough to support the changing needs of a police force. Who would have thought when we began on this, in the middle of an austerity programme being forced on us by the government, I would never have dreamed that we would, just 4 years later, be worrying about where we're going to put everybody when we've recruited nearly 660 new police officers into the force. It's a wonderful problem to have, but with it comes the issue of, can the estates that we have be flexible enough to provide the accommodation that the force now needs going forward. And I think that I assure you, I do keep asking both John and his colleague in the force, the Director of Finance, for reassurance that the commitments we've given to the strategy and the monies that we are spending are within an envelope that we can afford as a force. Because it would be a failure on my part if I left a legacy of debt that the force found in the future was going to be a problem. I think it's a relief to us all that we've been able to do most of this work, all of it. We haven't got a single public finance initiative project that we've initiated. We do have one, which is at the Merseyside Fire and Rescue headquarters in Bootle, but that's the only PFI that we have. All of the others have been brought forward. All of the borrowing has been done on the most prudential borrowing that's been available, and in particular, we've been using the public sector's main capital funder, Public Sector Loan Board, I think is its title. So I have asked the question very frequently, and it's a question that they go out of their way to demonstrate to me that the costs are affordable going forward.
Rob, thank you, Commissioner. John, Councillor Sayers. John, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Riley anticipated my question regarding the impact of uplift on the estate strategy. So the Commissioner and Mr. Riley have answered the question. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic. Do we have any further questions on this one? Brill, if we can note the estate strategy report. And if we move on to pages 119 to 120 of your bundle, governance arrangements, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. All actions emanating from the last meetings are in progress. The report covering the benefits of the DIP funding, you remember we had a conversation about that. It is being finalised. I'm sorry we haven't had it ready for this meeting, but we've been very stretched in the office. But there are plans for a small socially restricted ceremony to unveil the ghost statue on the 30th of April. If lockdown restrictions permit this to proceed. So I've got my prayer mat out and a candle lit in the corner, and hopefully that will go ahead as planned. And I hope that the panel will be as pleased as I have been to see the statue when it comes finally to rest in its new place.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have noticed Mr. Pickup his hand up, so I will bring him in, but I can only share your enthusiasm for the completion of the dog statue, and I hope we can all attend the unveiling, as it seems to have taken up quite some years. But yeah, it's I'm glad that that's completed. Keith.
Just in case, the Chair's earlier comment about me not missing things, have I missed where the statue is going to be located?
It will be in place at the Operational Command Centre in Speak, where the dogs are housed now and where their training is undertaken and where they are tasked to go out with the other teams involved in operational activity by the force.
I'm very grateful that has been confirmed. Thank you.
Well, any further queries, colleagues? Very well, we will note the report. And thus it falls to me to say, for the final time, we do obviously have several other matters, but these are panel matters only that don't require the attendance of the Commissioner or her team. So for the final time, it falls on me to say, Commissioner, you are, of course, free to leave, should you so wish. Once again, thank you very much for your service. And
thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel, and I appreciate everything that we've been able to do together. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Speak soon. Colleagues, if we move to agenda item 8, page 121, your bundles, panel anticipated financial outturn 2020 to 2021. This is our accounts. Mr. Moran.
Thanks, Chair. This is the second of 2 update reports that are usually shared with the panel on the panel's budget during each municipal year. Panel members will be aware that the panel receives grant totalling £64,340 each year. It has to be accounted for to the Home Office twice in the year. And prior to the end of the financial year, we're expected to submit anticipated financial outturn, and we were expected to do that by the 5th of March, and that information has been submitted. So the figures that are included in this report reflect what is in that submission to the Home Office for the second part of the year. Obviously, the vast majority of what is spent out of that grant goes towards the support of the panel from an administrative perspective. As you alluded to earlier in the meeting, it has been an unusual year with extra demands on the support that is provided to the panel, and that probably reflects itself in the variance between the funding available and the actual cost that has incurred, which sort of exceeds the grant funding by just over £4,800. That is higher than in previous years. Obviously, the rest of the information is in the report. Happy to take any questions on it. The panel is asked to note the anticipated outturn and agree to continue regular updates on the panel budget. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. I'd like to begin and this is a comment I've made several times in our preparations, but I want to make sure that it's publicly noted. This panel is extraordinarily good value for money. Given our responsibilities, we don't share the strategic or operational command that our colleagues on the Fire Authority, the Transport Authority or the Waste Authority hold in relation to regional policy. Obviously that remit is reserved to the Commissioner, but simply from today, in terms of appointing a new Chief Constable and securing the future direction of Merseyside Police, we clearly have considerable responsibility and authority. And, you know, it's a point of pride that none of us have ever claimed the £920 a year in support since the inception of the panel in 2012. And this year has also been exceptionally difficult. I alluded to it earlier in relation to the amount of work that panel officers have put in this year. Obviously, we had confirmation hearings for a variety of officers, including this morning's. Obviously, we've had to run the panel remotely, and that has not been an easy task. And finally, we have a responsibility to take the public's interests and engagement to heart. And that requires a significant amount of officer hours when public communications reach us. When certain members of the public are unreasonable, that they do not accept the realities of regulations or laws, and when officers are unfairly bombarded with repeated copy and paste jobs of the same complaints, they cannot simply ignore them. Each one has to be considered in depth, in detail, and this takes up an extraordinary amount of time. To put it bluntly, David, Patrick and Richard are not solely here to support this panel, but have a variety of other tasks at the host authority, as well as the support from the monitoring officer of Knowsley, Gemma Jones. They've devoted a considerable amount of time, and that time needs to be paid for. And whilst I don't begrudge the use of public funds to deal with public matters, when unreasonableness affects the operational capacity and extends the budget of this panel, it is unfair and it is, quite frankly, unbelievable. So it must be noted that given all the dramatic changes we have faced this year, we've still managed to run this panel in exceptional good value for money, and I'd like to note that, and I'd like that applauded, not formally, but of course just in writing, that we've done that well to manage the public's money in this regard. So unless anyone's got any further issues they'd like to raise, I'd again like to note the item, if that's okay. Fantastic. Thank you, colleagues. That is noted. Agenda item 9 on page 125. Monitoring of conduct matters and complaints against relevant office holders, September 2020 to March 2021. Mr. Moran.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, panel members have the report in front of them. Again, this is a twice yearly update that we provide to panel members in terms of complaints that have been handled on the panel's behalf by the host authority's monitoring officer. Obviously, that's a decision that the panel makes to delegate that responsibility to the host authority. Just to confirm that no valid complaints have been received in the last 6 month periods. There were 2 potential complaints. They're referred to within the body of the report, but neither of those were deemed to be valid, Chair. Again, it's a report for noting and for the panel to agree to continue to receive updates in this respect. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Only to continue my commentary from the further item, that simply wishing that a complaint was valid is unfortunately not a basis for a valid complaint. You know, complaints against authority, complaints against a legal body must show a breach of the regulations, and it is unfortunate that individuals receive that kind of legal advice that the complaints are not valid, and we can't help further and insist on taking up officer time with that. And that's the only comment I'd like to make. Colleagues, anything further to add? Fantastic. If we note the report at agenda item 9. Agenda item 10, Mr. Moran, review of panel activity for the year and for the future work programme.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this obviously is the last item that the panel will consider in 2020-21, and it has been usual practice for the panel to receive an item to reflect upon what has been done in the previous year and to look forward to the following year and perhaps make some pointers to next year's panel in terms of what might be included within that work programme. Section 4 of the report provides our summary of what the panel has done over what has to be considered the most unusual of years. Some things to highlight. Panel member attendance was 77% this year, which is higher than just one of the previous 5 years, and I think that is something that members may wish to reflect on. Looking forward to next year, there's some suggestions in terms of how the panel may wish to operate, in terms of, again, focusing in on the Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan. You will obviously have to, or the panel, next year's panel will need to handle the precept proposal and ongoing scrutiny of the new Commissioner's decisions. There are also other areas that I think the panel has probably flagged up during the course of the year that they might want to recommend to next year's panel, including an item that was included today on the estate strategy that may wish something that next year's panel might wish to follow up on, the Community First programme. The panel, certainly at the start of this year, at the meetings at the start of the year, were very keen to follow up on proposals around community safety funding and how that might be dealt with by the new Commissioner. And again, some of the standard stuff that you might want to recommend in terms of budgets and complaints monitoring. One thing that the panel might want to have thought to and comment on and pass on their comments to next year's panel in terms of the frequency of meetings. This year you had 7 meetings of the panel, you had 2 briefings and 2 confirmation hearings. All of those were conducted remotely. We note that the interim legislation that allows that to happen is actually due to lapse in May, early May. Now that would require next year's panel to meet in person, which might actually be problematic in terms of the restrictions that might still be in place at that time. Panel members may wish to comment on that. We are conscious that there is ongoing lobbying in relation to that particular issue. But in that area, we've set out within 5.12 to the report a potential programme of meetings for next year's panel, which aligns with standard timetabling for panel meetings in previous years. And panel members might wish to take a view, if we are obliged to have physical meetings next year, whether they would suggest that the practice of having those meetings in the council chamber in Huyton is something that you would recommend to next year's panel. Leave it open now, Chair, to the panel to reflect on what they've achieved over the last year, highlight what's went well, what could have been improved on, and any recommendations you might want to make to next year's panel. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. For reasons that are obvious, I'm not going to make any recommendations myself on how you should proceed next year. I don't think it's my responsibility. However, what I would like noted is the fact that remote meetings have proved a boon to myself personally in relation to attendance at meetings. It's not easy being a councillor when you work full time alongside of it. And I have found these very helpful, though obviously the lack of human contact does eventually get somewhat wearing. But yeah, I think we have done fantastically in terms of remote working. I like the fact that we were termed an early adopter. I think I said at the time that we were the trendsetter for Merseyside. I think we were actually the first organisation politically in Merseyside to go by this, and I think we have shown that this works well. And one would hope that the government would listen and offer hybrid solutions going forward, not least of which to allow a greater diversity of people to get involved in local authorities, purely from an economic perspective as well, as it is challenging. It is challenging to remain a councillor and work full time. But yeah, I'd open up to the floor for suggestions for the future work programme. Thank you.
Chair, can I suggest that we accept the information in the report, but in light of the change in circumstances later in the summer, that we review the situation at that point. Whether we're able to remotely meet in July for the annual meeting is another matter. Although Knowsley Council have done some work on the chamber to facilitate hybrid meetings, so that may be something that we'd like to consider, with some of us staying at home and some staying, actually going to the chamber to be able to facilitate the attendance. But who knows? We don't know. It's still early days yet, and also there's some change in legislation that's going to be needed. Hopefully, I'm hoping that the government sees sense in this and actually allow for the continuation, if necessary, of these type of meetings remotely, even just to satisfy their own roadmap, because it doesn't fit in with the timescales within that. So let's hope they see some sense in that. But let's review it, and maybe in the first meeting, and see how we go. That's your suggestion, Chair.
I appreciate that. Before we come back to that proposal, we'll go to Keith first, and then John.
Thank you, Chair. I actually agree. I think it's going to be very difficult for us now to add further comment to what David has said. I think what he said is appropriate. The report lays out the areas, and I think Councillor Ashton is right to say early on in the new year, let's review the plan with the new commissioner, so we can get a programme together in that sense. But the other thing that concerns me is that the date is proposed for the 8th of July, the annual meeting. By that time, a new commissioner and any new councillors, if I put that who might be elected to the panel, will actually have been in post for 2 months. And I wonder whether that isn't, and we will be without a chair at that period of time and a deputy chair, whether in fact there ought to be some earlier movement of the panel, as it were, to at least formalise the meeting of the panel and bring new people in. And that's separate from the sort of induction period, which I know David and the others tend to operate. There's a bit of concern that July the 8th is 2 months after the event, as it were.
Yeah, I do tend to agree to a certain extent. David, I will bring you in a second. I do tend to agree. However, that is my understanding is that's the usual process in terms of leadership. Whilst obviously I won't be here, John, I believe, becomes acting chair so long as he remains a member of the panel in the meantime. So obviously there's decisions that need made in that regard. I believe that's how that would work. But obviously that's, by the by. David, if you'd like to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just responding to Keith's comment and backing up what you said, the pattern that we've sort of recommended there is in line with previous practice. I think one of the things that we do have to consider there, obviously, is that the panel representation won't be confirmed by each of the constituent authorities until their annual meetings, which aren't usually conducted until the third week in May. And yeah, Keith reflected the fact that we would ordinarily have an induction session during the month of June, once clarity on panel representation has been provided from the constituent authorities. The constituent authorities have until the end of May to give that notice. Once that has been put together, we've been in a position to set the ball rolling. I know the panel has in some years, and this was one of them, conducted a meeting just for housekeeping purposes in June, which has been allied to the actual work planning and induction session with the panel at the start of the year. And again, that might be something that might need to be considered on this occasion as well, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. John, if we can bring you in.
Thanks, Chair. I think what I was going to say is going to support what Shane said, and Keith, I think it's eminently sensible that there can be an area sort of informal working range, because obviously none of us know, apart from the independent members and the listeners, none of us know whether we still be on the panel come after the elections in May, because obviously whether we're up for re-election or not, it's not in our gift to say that we're going to be members of the panel. So I think that would be useful if they could be brought forward to as early as possible, particularly in view of the fact that, unlike certainly in my experience in the last few years, we've also got a new commissioner who will be in place as well. So I think it'd be useful if what David outlined, if that's a possibility, then we ask him to facilitate that if it's possible. Just before we finish, Chair, I want to formally move a vote of thanks by the panel for the work that you've done as the Chair, and to wish you luck for the future, and also once again to thank the officers who facilitate everything that we do. Thanks very much.
Could I formally second that?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah, fully support that.
Thank you all. I made some comments in private earlier, and I won't go on, but this has been a rewarding job, but one that couldn't be done without each and every one of you, especially as we've said many times, the support of the officers who really keep this running. So thank you all. So if we know the recommendations of that, and I haven't been apprised of any urgent business that fulfills the strictures of item 11. I believe that's it. Thank you all very much for your attendance. I do appreciate it. We will all meet when we can, once the term is over. I would like to wish you all good luck for the future. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you, Chair, as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.